Some of you may know me. I'm Bill Schmidt. I'm Dean of the Nichols School of the Environment, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the inaugural Corporate Connections lecture series. This will be probably the last one we have this year, but it'll be the first of many more that will follow next year. And all of those of you who are graduating this year, this is your excuse to register and come on back next year. Okay? So clearly, the private sector and the nonprofit sector has traditionally been a major area of activity for environmental issues and a major place for our students to end up working. However, the private sector and the corporate sector is incredibly important. I believe that easily, probably the majority of decisions that are made that have a significant impact on the environment are made at the corporate level, within the corporate culture, within the private sector. Lots of times I suspect those decisions are made without realizing that their decisions are going to have a major impact on the environment. And so regardless of where you end up working, I think it's important that you have an understanding of the corporate culture. And hopefully many of you will end up working within the private sector and will be in a position to make the point and say, wait a second, you guys, this is not such a good idea because it's going to have some impact on the environment, maybe short term, maybe long term. A great example of that, for example, is the discovery, manufacture, and use of freons before many of you were born in aerosol spray cans and refrigerants, where no one realized that they would have an impact on the environment, on the stratospheric ozone layer. Finally was realized, but it's going to take us another 40 or 50 years for that stuff to ultimately get out of the atmosphere. And if we had the right people in the right place at DuPont or what have you, it might have been a very different thing. So this is the beginning of a lecture series to give you an opportunity to learn more about the corporate and private sector and that culture, and many of the really exciting things that corporations are now doing on the sustainability front. And I think Sangeeta, who's the head of our Business and Environment Club, but it's Business and Environment Club, is going to introduce our first speaker. Welcome, Sangeeta.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Schmidt. So again, good morning. And it's really good to see so many faces in the midst of finals, projects, and papers. But on behalf of the Business and Environment Club at the Nichols School, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Steve Yucknut, the Vice President of Sustainability for Kraft Foods. So Steve's been at Kraft for about 20 years now. He's gotten 5 patents as well as numerous industry awards. He started off as a scientist engineer, I believe, and then over the years worked across a variety of positions. Today, as the Vice President of Sustainability, Steve is in charge of Kraft's environmental, economic, and social responsibilities, as well as the company's products globally. His ultimate goal is to make sustainability an integral part of every business decision at Kraft. So with that, I would like to introduce Steve.
Thank you very much. We can keep this as conversational as you guys would like. I have a presentation, and I can go through a number of different slides, but stop me at any point in time. You can stop me early, you can stop me late, we can go wherever direction you guys want to go. I know there's a variety of disciplines in the room. I know you're pursuing a variety of different degrees, so I'll try to hit on as much as what I heard in advance. So let me just start just for grounding, and I'll go really quickly through this background piece because I think you guys are all relatively well educated on the subject, but just to make sure that we're on the same page. Let me first start with a little bit of grounding. So when we, inside of Kraft Foods, which is 144,000 people strong, look at sustainability, we start with the Brundtland Commission report from 1987, which you're probably all familiar with, but development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's being thoughtful and being mindful that there's a tomorrow and that you have to live in that way. And society today definitely is not in that situation. And then to maybe simplify it a little bit more and operationalize it, it's that intersection of environmental, social, and economic responsibility. And then at the most base level, it's land, air, water, and people. So the most pressing of concerns are kind of captured here, and I know you're all familiar with them, so I'm not going to go at length into each and every one, but I would like to focus in particular on the constraining of renewable resources. So first of all, as a for-profit company, second largest food company in the world, employing 145,000 people, but let me talk in particular about constraining of renewable resources, and I'd like to put it in the context of this next page. So if you think about it, there's 6.8 billion people today. And there's going to be, roughly speaking, 9 billion people by 2050. That's an enormous increase. And that increase is going to put enormous incremental strain on the planet. Add to that the fact that standard of livings are increasing, and they're increasing dramatically in some of the highest population centers in the world. So if you look in particular at China, which has got 1.4 billion people, the standard of living, the GDP is growing at about 8.5%. If you look at India, which is the second largest country in the world at like 1.2 billion people, they're growing at about 6.5%. So you've got extremely large population densities increasing their consumptive behavior. The World Wildlife Foundation every couple of years does an assessment of the Earth's ability to replenish itself and then the rate at which society is drawing upon it. And the last time they did it was a couple of years ago, and the way to think of it is that the Earth has the ability to replenish itself at the rate of 1, and society is tapping into it at the rate of 1.25. So it's a really significant difference, and if everyone in the world lived the way the United States does, we'd need 8 planets to sustain society. So this is a chart that drives a lot of the strategic thinking behind how Kraft is trying to change the way they go to market, all the way from the planting of seeds forward through to the discardment of packaging. I'm going to give you examples of all of that. But again, this is kind of a grounding so you understand how we're looking at it philosophically, what's driving our strategic intent, how we're educating with inside of Kraft. And obviously, because we're a consumer-driven company, we need to be extremely mindful of the consumer. Inside of Kraft, because we're a company that's made up of 150 plus brands, marketing makes a lot of decisions. Marketing makes most of the decisions. The really big decisions come through marketing. And marketing is managed brand by brand. So how do you get the marketers to understand all of this and try to leverage sustainability? That's the key to the whole piece. So what consumers are seeing and what consumers believe is of critical importance to the marketers at Kraft Foods, and therefore we have to be on the front end of it. So to operationalize it into a schematic, if you will, you take the 3 areas of responsibility, social, economic, environmental, overlay them, and create a sweet spot in the center. And the way we try to position it to people is to think of that as a lens. And what my job and my team's job is to teach people how to focus by looking through that lens. And we would argue that if you look through it with enough knowledge, you're going to find unique opportunities for positive change. And we're seeing it left, right, and center. The key to all of this, though, is that the vision comes to life, because 5 people sitting in the center aren't going to be able to make a difference. 144,000 people changing just a little bit of what they do is going to make an enormous difference. So this is an inclusive strategy, which makes it a little bit difficult in terms of implementation, but much more impactful if it works. In order to simplify, and this is a dramatic simplification, we've come up with 6 areas of focus, and we've constructed what we call the sustainability wheel. Agricultural commodities, packaging, energy, water, waste, transportation, and distribution. Those are the 6 places we want people to maniacally focus. So what's not here, and what is often included when you see sustainability defined in other places, are things like safety, and diversity, and health and wellness, and governance. Those are all extremely important topics. However, they're all being managed extremely well already, and they don't need my incremental oversight, and they don't need a change in focus inside the company. The company is doing very well in all those places, and I don't think they need a paradigm shift. We need to shift from a paradigm perspective in all these areas. So this is where we're going to focus, and this is the best way to keep people single-minded and keep people interested within the company, because we've got a lot of different competing priorities. So that's kind of how we look at it. So to bring it into a numeric perspective, we've got extremely aggressive goals. Before I go into this, though, let me just give you kind of a little bit of the corporate context as to how we got to where we are right now. Our current Chief Executive Officer and Chairman is Irene Rosenfeld. She came into her position in the middle of 2006. She's an outstanding lady. She came in 2006. About 3 months thereafter, a small group of us got together and spoke to Irene and said, we think that Kraft has an opportunity to make sustainability a viable business strategy. So take it out of corporate social responsibility, where it was sitting at the time and being managed very effectively, but by a kind of a small group of folks. It was more corporate legal affairs people that were doing a lot of the policy-related things, and they were thinking more so from a defensive posture than they were from a proactive stance. And they definitely weren't looking to leverage it to grow the top line or to grow the bottom line. Now, there were people in manufacturing jobs who were doing great things in factories to reduce the consumption of energy or reduce the consumption of water or reduce the production of waste because they made financial sense. It was productivity. Now, it happened to be good for the environment, and that's wonderful, but that was not their intent. So how do we take the opportunity and make it one that all within Kraft can embrace? The only way you can do it is if it delivers on the top line and it delivers on the bottom line. So this is a business strategy. This isn't about philanthropy. This is about business. This is about the top line. This is about the bottom line, but driving it kind of differently. So in order to keep people focused, we need to have numeric aspirations that we can hold them accountable to the person. Each production facility worldwide has to meet these goals independently, and then they all have to ladder up to the company meeting these goals. So we put them in place in 2006, 2007, with 2005 as the base year, and 2011 as the year of achievement. So it's a 6-year horizon. Reduce energy by 25%, reduce greenhouse gases by 25%, waste by 15%, water by 15%, and then take 150 million pounds out of packaging. Through December 31st of last year, 2009, this is how we're doing, and we're doing really well. So we're down 15 and 17 respectively on energy and greenhouse gases. We're down 30% on waste, 32% on water, and 174 million pounds on packaging. So because we achieved our intentions 2 years in advance of what we had set out to do, we had to raise the bar. So these are our new goals, which will be published actually shortly. So those are really aggressive. And if you look out across our competitive set, and even if you go outside our industry into the tangential industries, you'll find these are really aggressive. And I'm extremely pleased that we decided to be as aggressive we are on energy, because we've got a lot of people sweating this difference between 15 and 25, 17 and 25, which is changing the way we're doing things. The plant managers all realize that they can't get there unless they do substantial shifts in how they go to market.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are you doing anything to incentivize folks down in the trenches to meet these goals?
Yeah, the first piece of incentive is just map performance. So managing and appraising performance, the annual performance review process has this built into it. And I'll tell you a funny story. So this is like probably like middle of January, and the person who's responsible, human resources, for performance appraisals gives me a call. It's the senior vice president of benefits. And I'd never spoken to the person before. And he said, hey, Steve, this is Dale, and this is the deal. We're in the process of reviewing Irene, who again is our CEO, and we're doing our MAP goals, and we'd like your input. I'm like, you want my input on Irene's performance, is that right? Am I tracking here with you? And he goes, yeah, well, the board reviews Irene's performance and provides a grade. And so the board is doing her review, and you're in it. And I said, I don't even know what you mean. And he said, well, Irene held herself accountable to sustainability in her own personal MAP goals. And the board wants your point of view about how good she's doing. So that's kind of how we're doing it. So we're trying to build it in numerically to the production facilities, numeric intentions, and then we're building it into performance and appraisal for key leaders. It can't be for everybody. All 144,000 can't have, sustainability as part of their annual performance review, but a lot of the key leaders can. So that's the biggest thing that we're doing, and it's working. So it's great.
A quick question.
Sure.
So you said it's a big target goal to get that gap 15 to 25% on energy. And you say it has to make some big paradigm shifts for plant managers, whoever it might be, who has that capacity to do that. So what is Kraft, I guess, at the corporate level doing to support that change? I mean, are you guys allowing them, extended capital expenditures to put in new equipment?
Great question. Great question. No, because if we did, we'd be changing the intent at the onset. Because the intent at the onset is to make this a business strategy. It's got to drive top-line performance. It's got to drive bottom-line performance. And if we change the rules, if we lower the hurdle, then we've just denigrated our profit-seeking intentions. So we can't. So we've got an internal rate of return for capital expenditures. That internal rate of return is the same for sustainability-related projects as it is for non-sustainability-related projects. So what we are doing, though, to enable them to make paradigm shifts is providing them the resources, providing them additional sensitivity analysis. So like if an AR would come up, a capital appropriation request would come to my desk, and let's say it has an internal rate of return of 13%. I say, I'm sorry, but capital's tight this year. I'm not going to give you a project that's got a 13% return. Instead of sending them away and say no, we say, come on in, though, and let's look at this closer, and let's see if there's a way we can shift your assumptions to get that return higher. All right, because we can't live with 13, but I don't want to say no. So what we've changed is don't say no. So sustainability-related projects get incremental attention, they get incremental resources, they get incremental effort. But we aren't going to change the rules by which we make financial decisions. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Yeah. And I'll give you an example of one in just a minute of where it worked out pretty well taking that approach. Go ahead.
Packaging is the only one that's not expressed in percent terms.
Great question. Yeah, great question. You're right about the questions. Here's why. The challenge with packaging is that not every package is created equal. And so we package so many different kinds of foods that each and every package has a different headspace circumstance. Some packages don't lend themselves to being as efficient as others. So I'll give an example of one that's really efficient, mayonnaise. So we sell mayonnaise. Mayonnaise comes in a jar that's packed all the way to the top. Typically when you take the jar off, on the inside of the lid, you've got a little bit of mayonnaise. That's how full it is. We also sell a lot of cookies and crackers through our Nabisco brand. Cookies and crackers don't lend themselves to that kind of a density of pack because of primarily the equipment on the production lines and the need for headspace for settling and the line speeds and things of that nature. So in order to try to normalize that, we decided to move in a direction that was more consistent with how we track productivity. Because the way we track productivity is kind of project by project. Everyone is pursuing reductions in cost. And what ends up happening is you ratchet them up, business unit by business unit, to get to your total. That's what this is. 174 million pounds came out of 250 projects, all added up together to get to that number on a global basis. Every single business unit in the company contributed. And almost every single person in the packaging department contributed, because we just did a review last week on it. So that's why we did it that way, because it was easier to track it, and it was easier to hold people accountable project by project that way. So it's a little bit tougher in the other places where you can just strictly look at your consumption of natural gas or your BTUs of energy or your gigajoules, however you wanted to track it. It just lends itself that way. And if you make the tracking too difficult, then people lose interest. It's got to be really, really simple. And this was the simplest way to enable. So that's why we did it that way. But it's a great question.
Can I answer the question about packaging? It just occurs to me. So not all packaging is created equal. Obviously, some might argue that glass is better than whatever, plastic, or recycled paper is better than whatever. And some might argue that the weight that you have to transport, how much the package is actually contributing to the weight. So to what extent are those things looked at?
Let me go ahead here, and that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'll come back. The best example I've got to that is this project right here. So you're right. I mean, reduce, reuse, recycle, the mantra from way back when is still the right answer. I mean, that's definitely the way to approach this. Use less in the first place if you can. If you can get a secondary use, great. If you can recycle it, great. One of the products that we sell is Capri Sun, and Capri Sun is a huge business. Capri Sun comes in a pouch that doesn't lend itself to being recycled. It's a multi-layer lamination. It should be, and I want those who make multi-layer laminations and flexible films to continue to grow their industry. It's a great product. Things should be packaged in flexible films that don't lend themselves to being recycled. It's just reality. However, what you do end of life is where the paradigm shift comes. And what we were able to do is work with this innovative company with a gentleman who dropped out of Princeton to find an elegant solution. So what now happens, instead of these Capri Sun pouches going into landfill, they're collected by children primarily across the United States, accumulated into sufficient bundles, and then sent back to TerraCycle, which is the company we're working with. TerraCycle takes them, unfolds them, melds them together, and then creates these large rolls of film. Once you have a large roll of film, you can pretty much make anything. And we use them to make backpacks, messenger bags. We've got shower curtains. We've got kites. We've got boots. You name it. Capri Sun is a nice material for lots of different upcycled products. And it has just taken off tremendously. And it's the best example I've got of not letting the environment be a disproportionate focus of your intentions. It has to be the combination of economic, environment, and social responsibility. And if you just maniacally focus on the environment, you're going to potentially miss the biggest opportunities. We chased this for environmental reasons. We wanted to reduce post-consumer landfill contribution. We knew we had a big product. We knew it didn't lend itself to being recycled. We wanted to find an elegant solution. So we did it for environmental reasons. That's why we did this project. But the reason it took off was for societal, sociological benefit. What was happening is these brigades that collect the pouches were cropping up in schools. Classrooms were the obvious place for them to exist. We were giving the kids 2 cents, we still do, for every pouch they collect. So Kraft Foods gives every kid 2 cents for every pouch. They figure out how to get back to TerraCycle instead of sending it to the landfill. So any diversion that takes place, the kid gets rewarded for. 2 cents for every pouch. What was happening is these brigades were just proliferating tremendously, and the teachers and the moms were extremely thankful. They were like, I can't believe Kraft is doing this. This is great for the environment, but more importantly, it's great for my child. because they're learning about civility, they're learning about citizenship, they're even learning how to be an entrepreneur because they're figuring out how to get money to spend for their classroom. And it was just really feeding off of itself, and we were getting a ton of public recognition and positive press, and this thing has now just taken off. We've taken this idea now to Mexico, Brazil, the United Kingdom. We're launching in Canada this year. And it was all because of this innovative individual who had dropped out of Princeton, who came to us with jeans and a t-shirt, hadn't shaved, didn't have an appointment, showed up in the lobby and said, I'd like to stop and see Steve. And the secretary said, I don't think you have an appointment, but let me call him. And I said, well, if he came all the way from Princeton and he made it into the front door and he's got my name, I at least got to give him 15 minutes. So we talked and it was a great idea, so we took it there. So that's one way we're trying to get around the everything is about pounds, because not everything is about pounds. Sometimes it's design, sometimes it's sourcing, sometimes it's end of life. So it's the full life cycle that provides opportunities. And what's key about it is we're selling more Capri Sun. So the marketers care. So as soon as you get marketing enlisted, you win, because that's who makes all the decisions. So there's a tendency to say, for-profit company, bad. Big Kraft, bad. All they care about is making money. But it's just not true, because there's people who are in Kraft just like all of you. And it's made up of 144,000 people. By human nature, they want to do good, but they're being incented on profit. So how do you make that natural incentive to profit work in an environmentally and sociologically beneficial way? The best thing you do are things like this, where the Capri Sun brand manager is now selling more Capri Sun because he's doing something that's better for the environment and better for society. So that's going to proliferate, and that's going to replicate. And now that brand manager is getting phone calls from the other brand managers saying, how did you do this? How do you make it work? So we said, this is how it works. And then Kenco Coffee in the UK decided to do it. Tang in Brazil decided to do it. Lunchables is going to do it. We've got all these people now who want to go. So we're adding up that diverted landfill material, and it's becoming very, very significant. So when big companies get involved, big things happen. It's great for all these little boutiques to do all the right thing and to get the consumer vote. But they can only make little impacts. And little impacts are great. They're all great. But when big companies do things, big things happen. So you got to kind of try to find that balance. Go ahead.
So does the waste, or this diverted waste, is that counted in your waste reduction?
No, it's not.
You're counting waste that's coming out of the factory door.
Yeah, we should. We should. Right now, we're only holding ourselves accountable to what we have direct control over in a public way. The next time we do goals, I'm advocating right now that we expand our commitment beyond our four walls. It's really tough to make a commitment on something you only can influence. So like, I'd love to see us make a commitment on the front end of the supply chain. Because if you were to measure from end to end Kraft's impact on the environment, and let's say you were to do it by phase of life, and let's say you were to do it in a bar-charted fashion, and you were to look at not only greenhouse gases, but water and land, what you would find is the tallest bar on Kraft's chart is agricultural commodities, and significantly so. Now, agricultural commodities and how they're managed is out of our control. All we can do is influence. So holding ourselves accountable to things that we can influence, that we don't have direct control over, is tough, because now you can't fix it if it doesn't go in the right way. If it's under our direct control, we have more options, we have more levers.
Okay, cool, sorry. I have two questions for you. One, do you know like the percentage of your packaging that's actually diverted for this, and what percentage of that actually comes from these brigades or actually comes from possibly the factory? Because I would imagine getting the juice pouches from the brigades might be really hard to use for this material. And my other question is, how do projects like this kind of alter the perception of actually trying to solve the issue at hand? Because when I look at this type of packaging, I see the real issue as you can't recycle it. And when you turn it into a backpack and you fuse it together with a layer of plastic, and you add nylon to it, and like it's going to go to a landfill anyway, and it's really not recyclable.
Okay. There's a lot there. Let me try to answer what you've asked so far. So first of all, the numeric answer is very easy. You're right. We do take material that's from our manufacturing facility that is waste that would have gone to landfill, and we send it to TerraCycle, in addition to post-consumer waste, the pouches. But you're wrong in that one is more conducive to the operation, one is less. The individual pouches that come from the consumers are just as viable a source of raw material construction as the diverted waste from our manufacturing facilities. In terms of percentage, we started out with it being, I'll say 90% manufacturing waste, 10% consumer waste, and we've slowly over time shifted that to now it's probably more 70-30, and probably by the end of this year it'll be more like 60-40, because it all depends on the quantities you're able to collect one at a time, kid by kid, right? So that's a little bit more daunting. And then as it relates to what percentage of the total volume, when we started out year one, it was like 0.05%. It moved to 0.2%. This year it'll be like 2%, and we're targeting to get to 30%. So we've got to shift the whole model on how they're collected. So that's a challenge that we're working on right now. But eventually it will be extremely impactful. And then the last point, which is a little bit more dicey, but I will address it directly. I don't agree that those materials should be discounted or regarded less favorably because of their tendency not to lend themselves to being recycled. Because if you looked at the full life cycle of that as a packaging option versus the others that are more readily recycled, this has a lower footprint because it's less total material. Yes, it doesn't lend itself to recycling, and you could put it in a glass jar, or you could put it in a metal can, or you could put it in any other object, but it's not going to reduce the total impact to the planet. So you got to deal with the end-of-life reality of flexible films, and there's got to be other solutions. We don't add nylon to it, so the backpack that's been upcycled doesn't have any greater detriment to the planet than the original construction material. It's basically just Capri Sun in a different shape. So there really isn't anything that's added to it that's of significance. But it's a tough question, it really is. Again, I'm a little bit more pragmatic about it, and I want to acknowledge that some plastics and some materials just aren't going to lend themselves to recycling as readily as others, and there has to be alternative solutions. Because if we just say 100% recycled, then we're going to do more disservice than it may appear. You know, so it's a tough question. I think you had a hand up earlier.
I'm just curious about how your efforts fit in with the pushback that Walmart is doing in its supply chain, which you're part of.
Great question.
And sharing the knowledge that you're getting through your efforts with others who are part of it.
Great question. I work heavily with Walmart directly. Walmart has helped my internal case tremendously. They've given me so much ammunition with marketing. I've got nothing but high regard for Walmart. Now, what they're doing is difficult. I mean, some of it I agree with, some of it I don't philosophically. But taken in totality, they're doing a lot of good stuff. They deserve the credit they're getting. I love working with them. They're helping me help the planet. But let me give you an example here about Walmart. And then I'll come back to, I think you had a question over here in orange. So one of the challenges we have is dealing with waste at point of manufacture. There's a lot of byproduct that results from creating finished goods, right? You're bringing in raw materials, you're combining them, you're processing them, you're doing a bunch of different things to make a finished product. Not everything ends up in the box that you sell. Some of the things end up as waste, and you got to deal with them. One of the larger waste streams that we have as a company is whey. We do a lot of cheese-related products, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So one of the most challenging waste streams that we have is the one that comes from the production of Philadelphia cream cheese. And whey that results from Philadelphia cream cheese production is particularly difficult whey to manage. We do everything we can to get productive use out of our whey. We'll spray dry it into protein powders. We'll put it through microfiltration in order to pull out the micronutrients, in order to reuse them. But sometimes, no matter what you do, you've got waste that has no value. And in the case of cream cheese, the salt level and the acidity lend itself to being less useful. So what we had done in the past is either find appropriate applications on land for land spreading, or we'd send it to landfill. We no longer do that now in Lowville, New York, which is the largest cream cheese production facility in the world. It makes 51% of North America's cream cheese. We now take all of that whey and we put it into large vats. And then we add microorganisms, and the microorganisms eat the whey, eliminating it as waste. In that digestive process, they produce methane gas. We capture the methane gas, we compress it, we clean it, and then we send it back to the other side of the factory to feed the factory's boilers. And now 30% of that factory's energy is coming from what had been waste previously. So it's a great example of bottom line benefit to Kraft because we've just reduced our cost of goods sold because we're buying less fossil fuel, and we're not spending money to send stuff to landfill. It's better for the environment because we're not sending stuff to landfill, and it's better for the resulting society. So there's a whole lot of good that happened there. But where Walmart comes in is that was a bottom line exercise inside of Kraft. It was reducing our cost of goods sold. So how do we turn that into a top line revenue generator? Matt Kistler, who was here not too long ago presenting, approached us and said, we're doing Earth Month in a big way next year. This was a couple years ago. And we'd love for you and your peer set to submit ideas, and then we're going to pick the winners, and then we're going to feature them on Earth Day, which they turned into Earth Month. And if you're a winner, you're probably going to see an increase in sales. So send us your ideas. So we did a really nice job, PowerPoint presentation, 15 ideas, went down to Bentonville, and presented. And we got 5 ideas through, which we were ecstatic about. But this one didn't make it. And this is the one that got more oohs and ahs in the room than any other idea we had. And we thought, okay, this one's in the bank. We got marketing all excited. And then we got the results back, and Philadelphia wasn't on the list. So I called down to Matt, and I said, wait a second, what happened? I thought this was a big idea. You were smiling. It was all good. And, and he said, well, the problem is it's a behind-the-scenes benefit. It's all about productivity, and you guys aren't doing anything with it. It's not really a consumer idea. So that's why we didn't pick it, sorry. And I said, well, can you give me one more day? And he said, yes. I called up marketing. I said, here's the deal. So what we need to do is figure out a way to go front of pack. So how do we go front of pack with anaerobic digestion? How do we go front of pack with landfill? I mean, none of these things really resonate in the consumer mind. So the idea was simplistically, and it looks so easy with hindsight, made with renewable energy. So this is clearly renewable energy. So we created, again, overnight, this symbol. And then we said we need to be transparent, and we need to be extremely overt about our transparency. So let's set up a website that's got all the details, so any environmentalist, any NGO, anybody who wants to call into question the viability of this and maybe wants to accuse us of greenwashing will have what they need here. And that's what we did. And so we called back Matt, called back Walmart, said, here's the deal. They said, you're in. The following Earth Month, they featured Philadelphia cream cheese, and we sold 75% more than a year ago. So now we had an example of top line and bottom line all coming from the same idea. And to come back to your question, when we first did the capital appropriation for this, it had a return of 8%. And it would have been rejected, except we had agreed we were going to try harder on sustainability-related projects. That's the agreement we reached, right, guys? Yes. So how can we try harder? The answer was get revenue to contribute to the return instead of it being straight productivity, and use somebody else's capital. So all of this was built with a third party's capital. This is a design, build, operate environment. So it's our production facility, it's our real estate, but somebody else's capital. And so therefore it went from being an internal rate of return to a net present value. And the net present value is positive. It's always been positive. It had an 8% return when it was IRR. So that turned this project into something that was acceptable. And I think that kind of gets at the point that you were making. And then how do we go even further? Share this idea with our peers, which I do. So I have a group that I interact with from General Mills, Kellogg, Unilever, Nestle, Coke, P&G, and I share the things that I think can be shared in a non-competitive way, and this is one that I believe can be, because none of those people, in all honesty, make cream cheese. They all make different things, and all of them make things that would lend themselves to anaerobic digestion as a solution to fossil fuel. I would say when we first started, there were 3 points of inflection that made my internal argument valid. The first one was Walmart taking this on as an issue. The second one was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issuing a report that had teeth in it for a change. Because prior to that, they didn't. They were trying to be nice, and they were trying to be respectful of all sides of the debate. And so they would publish data in a commiserate fashion. They came out with their report, and I think it was March of 2007, that said it is unequivocal. It is with 99% certainty. And then they went on to talk about climate change and global warming. That was a very important piece. And then Al Gore came out with the inconvenient truth and brought it to the masses. So whether you believed in the way Al Gore presented his case or not, or whether it was effective in doing so, the reality is he got out to the mass market in a really effective way. And so you've got the Inconvenient Truth, Walmart, and the IPCC all doing the right things at just the right time, which created that point of inflection for companies like Kraft Foods to jump on board and say, I get this. Let's put resources against it. Because that's really the argument you want to make. Put resources against it. Don't tell them what to do. Tell them to focus on the issue, you know, because that's really what makes the biggest difference. All right, so one point that we didn't talk about yet that I need to, because it's the area that Kraft has the biggest impact. So I explained to you that we're in the process right now of footprinting the company, if you will, in terms of land, air, and water. It's a daunting exercise. And the challenge is trying to balance those who love precision and the tools of precision, because life cycle analysis is very in vogue, and it's got a purpose, but it can't be pursued for the big picture, because doing that kind of precision on the big picture slows you down tremendously. So I'll explain to you a conversation I had with the person in R&D who works for me, who's responsible for life cycle analysis. So we're in a conversation, and I said, all right, what I really want to know is I want to know Kraft's impact on the planet from farm to fork, from the planting of seeds all the way through to the discardment of packaging, inclusive of everything. And I want it on land, air, and water, and I want it by Thursday. And that's the kind of response I got. And this is an engineer who is precise to the 5th decimal point on every aspect of his life. So he was like, well, it can't be done, Steve. That's almost no way. Do you know what we have to do? And I said, no, the point is, we have a lot of good information right now. We're going to have to make 1 million assumptions, document all of them. You're going to be better off guessing than anybody I know. So guess where you have to. But get me a point of view ASAP on all 3 aspects of Kraft's environmental impact. And then let's go on a 10-year journey together to get precision. But we can't wait for all of the add-ups so that you feel confident talking about the number and you can defend yourself. I won't use it outside, I promise. I won't come into meetings like this with the bar chart I'm telling you about. It exists. But I can't share it because I promised that person I wouldn't show their lack of precision. But that's the point I wanted to make to him. Big picture, you have got to find that out now so that we can be focusing in the right places. Because I don't care if you're wrong by 50%, to be honest with you. I think you're going to give us information we need. And what ended up happening is I now have 3 bar charts, one for land, one for water, one for air, that all have the phases of our production cycle, from the planting of seeds to the discardment of packaging, with relative heights. And I know the y-axis is wrong. I don't even need a y-axis on the page, to be honest with you. I just need relative heights of bars. And what ended up happening is the tallest bar on all 3 charts, by far, was agricultural commodities. By far. Like 65% of Kraft's footprint is agricultural commodities, and that's not a precise measure. But order of magnitude, that's right. Right? So 65% of Kraft's inputs on agricultural commodities. Are we doing enough there? No. Could we do more? Yes. Can we do it in a profitable way that drives top and bottom line? Yes. So how do we get at that? And if I waited for the precision, then I wouldn't be getting at it quick enough. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of be pragmatic about as much of this as possible, because we are in a for-profit world, and I do work for a for-profit company, and what have you done for me lately is always the conversation. So how do you balance that with the knowledge you have about the issues? And then how do you try to drive it? That's really my job. So in the agricultural commodity space, what we did is looked then at that bar on another piece of paper. So I know the commodities I buy. I know the quantities. I know the countries they come from. Now I want you to take that bar and I want you to break it down, land, air, water, and give me a Pareto left to right. What are the commodities that are having the biggest impacts based on impact per square foot and volume of we buy? And then let's focus on the left-hand side of the page. And what you end up with for Kraft, coffee, cocoa, cashews, things that tend to come from the developing world, more so than from the temperate zone, or from the United States, or from Eastern Europe, Western Europe. One of the products is coffee. So how do you become more sustainable in the supply chain by influencing how coffee gets to your back door? One way to do it is with official certification schemes. And the official certification scheme that we chose for coffee was the Rainforest Alliance. They're fabulous. They're a great company. They do a lot of things right. And they provide you with that autonomous credibility that many need in order to believe you, because society is still skeptical of big companies and corporate America and those who make profit. So how do you break through that consumer confusion or that consumer perception, or in maybe some cases consumer reality, with objectivity? And the way to do it is with certification. So whether it's Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, UTZ, organic, they all have value. So how can we leverage that? We started with the Rainforest Alliance relatively small. We're now the largest buyer of Rainforest Alliance beans in the whole world, and we bought last year 38,000 metric tons. Every Rainforest Alliance bean was produced in a better way than a standard bean. So that's how Kraft Foods can have an impact upstream in the supply chain in the area where we have the greatest fundamental environmental impact. How do you do more of that? Best way is for that product to lead to increase in sales. And that's exactly what happened for us with the Kenco product. So the Kenco product is sold exclusively in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom consumers are further along on the continuum of knowledge and understanding than any other society in the world. US is not that far behind, but the UK is very progressive. There's a lot of people who get it. So let's go to the UK, let's use a big coffee brand, and let's try to take it in a sustainable direction. So we started with the coffee. And revenue is up 11%, share is up 1.2%, and of all the growth-related conversation that took place in Q4, 52% of it was pointed towards Kenco. We're doing great in that market. And just to put perspective, selling coffee in the United Kingdom is not easy. It's a very, very entrenched product that's been around forever. And it's competing with Nestle, Sara Lee, Procter & Gamble. I mean, you've got some fierce competitors in an extremely developed market, and we were able to move the needle substantially by embracing sustainability. And now that we've got the team on board, which is the key to all of it, you got to get marketing. Once you got the team on board, now they're running with it. Now they're going in 100 different directions. So the next execution that they did, which came out earlier this year, and I'd show you the TV because it's really cool, but it's just not conducive to this delivery format. So here's the next commercial. So what we did is, and to the point that was made somewhere in the back about glass, so in the UK market, the predominant consumption of coffee is in soluble form. It's not roast and ground. So it's not percolated. It's used hot water. You pour it in. It's instant. And what we sell it in are glass jars. So what we decided is most of the people decant their coffee, meaning they take it out of the container they buy it in, and they put it in something else in their home that they think keeps it fresher, and sometimes it does keep it fresher. We said, let's take that behavior and let's try to create a sustainability solution. And we went with a refill pack. And so the refill pack is 97% less packaging, which is a great environmental solution. And hand it to the Kenco people and appreciate what Marketing Engage does. They came out with a great campaign, and it has drove sales through the roof. And the whole concept is kind of built off British humor. And the idea is we'd have gone with 100% less packaging, but it just wasn't practical. And then they show different executions of no packaging. So you got, you know, the guy coming up to the checkout counter with the card in his mouth, and he's holding the coffee, and he's trying to pay for it. And then you got the lady walking down the street with her brassiere, and she's holding the coffee in the brassiere. And so it was fabulous because it was light, because that's what people want. They don't want necessarily to be depressed by the environmental situation. They want to feel hopeful. So that commercial showed consumers a way to engage directly by voting with their pocketbooks in a hopeful kind of sense. And that drove the business even further. So it's a very thin, flexible film that doesn't have the kind of shelf life that a glass jar would have. Knowing that the behavior is to go home and quickly put it in something else, so don't overpackage it, right? Because I would argue this is overpackaged if they're not keeping it in the home. Because the purpose of the package is to get it to the consumer's home in one piece, communicate certain things, keep the product fresh. If you can keep the product fresh with lesser packaging, because you're only keeping it fresh until it gets home, you can use less packaging.
What happens to the thin film package?
It's TerraCycle. So Kenco has approached TerraCycle, and now they've taken it to a whole nother level. They created this program with the kids, and it's really innovative.
Can you tell us about some of the changes that you had to make in order to get certified by the Rainforest?
Oh, it's really hard. It took like, it takes like 18 months. Like there has to be a certain amount of shade trees, natural shade trees, because one of the problems with products that come from the developing world is deforestation. Biggest issue right now is palm oil by far. And we're working with a bunch of groups to try to address the palm oil situation. But anything that grows in the tropics is really not being managed with as much discipline, to try to be fair, as things that are happening in the developed market. So one of the things you have to do to get Rainforest Alliance certification is to bring back the natural habitat, and primarily for biodiversity, but also for care of the coffee. So we know that if coffee is being grown with shade trees in close proximity, the coffee is better. The problem is that it's not intuitively obvious. You want to take advantage of all that space. You don't want to put shade trees where coffee trees could be, because it just doesn't make intuitive sense to a farmer. So you've got to come in there and you've got to dictate certain aspects in order to get the certification. And then as a result of getting the certification, the coffee farmer gets more pennies per pound.
So what I was going to say, you told the farmers that, listen, you're going to need to do this, get Rainforest Alliance certified so we can buy up your products and sell, right?
Yep. And it's all open market. So we don't have any contracts with the farmers. You go in and you say, here's the situation. If you take on the Rainforest Alliance certification scheme, you will produce more coffee per hectare. You will make better coffee, and companies like Kraft will pay more per pound for it. And then you got to convince them of that. And then you've got to maybe even work with them on the investment on the front end, because they may not have the financial capability or they may not have the confidence. So you got to figure out the financial mechanisms. You might have to use microfinance. You might have to use third parties. So you got to enable that to happen. You can't just say, hey, trust me, farmer. Everything's going to be good 2 years from now. I realize you got to invest a lot of money, and I realize it may not feel right, but trust me, 2 years from now I'm going to come and buy it. You can't do that. You got to somehow work with them. Go ahead.
Are you dealing at all with the issue that some of the certification programs may be in conflict with social goals? The cost of certification is a real problem for small producers. And I recently talked with a medium to small producer of coffee from Nicaragua. And he was complaining bitterly that the certifiers wanted him now to have organic certification of all of his inputs. So if he buys manure to put on the coffee, he's got to somehow, convince them or prove to them there's a chain of custody that these cows never had anything that was artificial.
Yep.
And this could easily create some really significant social problems.
It's an excellent point, and you're right. There's a lot of it. Right now, there isn't sufficient pull from the agronomy community, from the farmers in particular, to be certified. That's a problem. They should want this. If they don't, then something's not right in the formula. So everyone involved has got to work to continuously improve the circumstance. And that's something that we're working on right now, not only with Rainforest Alliance, but also with Fair Trade. So my bias would be to say that I would say 80% of their effort right now is increasing acreage. They want to get more hectares under cultivation that are rainforest certified or fair trade certified, and that's where a lot of their focus is. I'd love to see that paradigm shifted to 80% of the effort being put on existing acreage under cultivation and maximizing its potential for the farmer from a profitability perspective and in terms of the land's capability for output. Because if you're going from 6.7 to 9 billion people, ultimately the pressure point is going to be on arable land. So you've got to be getting maximum output for all arable land. And if right now your primary focus is on expansion of land under the Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trade certification schemes, so it's a great question, and it's very true. You can find farmers across the entire planet who are skeptical of the system and who've been under it for years and don't love it. That's not good. But there are lots who do. There are lots of people who are better off because of it, and you got to find out what they're doing different. So you've got to take almost a consumer approach. We're working with the Gates Foundation right now on a bunch of things, but one of them is exactly that. And I was just out in Seattle recently. The question that they said is, could Kraft Foods come in and teach us how to listen? You guys do an incredible job listening to consumers because it's your lifeblood, because it's what's driving your business performance. You know how to listen. How can we take your approach to listening to the consumer and apply it to the farm community? How can we learn how to listen better to agronomy and the farm community? And let's take your segmentation models. Let's take your qualitative and quantitative approaches to generating insight, and let's try to apply them in agronomic circumstances. And we're working with a number of universities as well, and we're trying to drive that. How do you take the gender bias out of the equation? Again, something that we tend to understand relatively well are the gender differences based on a variety of circumstances for consumer-related reasons.
I have the impression that we could probably go on for
Yeah, I'm a little long-winded.
Right, for another hour. There'll be a question and answer back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.